When the HOA banned all street parking during winter storms, they thought they could bully the neighborhood into submission. But I had other plans. Instead of moving my car, I bought a Zamboni, yes, an actual ice resurfacing machine, and turned their ridiculous rule into the coldest revenge imaginable. It began like any other early winter in Maplewood Estates, a quiet, picture-perfect suburban neighborhood where the rules mattered more than common sense. Each house looked identical, with precisely trimmed lawns now buried under a fresh blanket of snow. The kind of place where neighbors waved politely but watched each other with quiet judgment. The first snow of the season came earlier than usual. Overnight, the streets turned into glistening ribbons of white, and by morning, the HOA's latest decree had arrived, effective immediately: all street parking is prohibited during winter months. At first glance, it seemed like a reasonable rule. The justification was safety. They claimed the snowplows couldn't operate efficiently with cars parked on the curb. But everyone knew the truth. The rule came from the board's president, Marlene Henshaw, the self-proclaimed guardian of Maplewood perfection, better known among residents as Snow Karen. Marlene lived 3 houses down from me. Her obsession with the HOA's power wasn't subtle. She'd measure the height of grass blades in the summer and photograph driveways in winter, searching for violations. When she saw a chance to flex authority, she took it. The parking ban wasn't about snow, it was about control. For me, the rule hit differently. My driveway was narrow and sloped sharply downward toward my garage, nearly impossible to navigate safely when iced over. I'd always parked on the street during heavy snow, avoiding the daily risk of sliding into my own fence. But now, that wasn't allowed. The HOA expected me to obey without question. The first ticket came within a week. A bright yellow slip under my wiper blade, fluttering in the icy wind like a badge of shame. A $75 fine for illegal street parking during restricted winter hours. I wasn't alone, several neighbors got similar tickets. But unlike them, I wasn't about to let it slide. Every morning, I watched the HOA's security patrol, which was really just Marlene's husband, drive around in his SUV like a wannabe cop. He'd snap photos, take notes, and report them at the next HOA meeting as if he'd uncovered serious crimes. The arrogance of it all burned quietly inside me. Then came the breaking point. A blizzard swept through Maplewood one weekend, leaving the streets buried in over a foot of snow. My driveway was a frozen slope of ice, and I had no choice but to leave my car parked overnight. By sunrise, the HOA had fined me again, and this time, threatened to tow my vehicle if I didn't comply immediately. Something inside me snapped that day. If they wanted me off the street, they'd have to do better than bullying letters and fake rules. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction. I decided to fight back, but not through shouting matches or angry emails. I wanted something smarter. Something that would humiliate them in their own language, the language of absurdity and compliance. And that's when the idea struck me. I remembered an old ice rink nearby that had recently closed down. A local auction site had listed their equipment for sale, including one piece that stood out, a fully functional Zamboni machine. The thought hit me like a spark of chaotic inspiration. If the HOA's concern was snow removal and street cleanliness, then I'd take that rule literally. I'd maintain my street parking space so perfectly that no one could complain, not even Marlene. So, I placed the winning bid. A week later, a flatbed truck arrived at my house, carrying one large, rumbling, slightly dented, yet glorious Zamboni. It was old, loud, and painted in faded blue, but to me, it was a symbol of rebellion. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the frosted rooftops, I backed the Zamboni off the trailer. Neighbors peeked through curtains. Some stepped outside, bundled in coats, staring in disbelief as I slowly drove the massive machine down the street like a parade float of vengeance. The hum of its motor echoed down the cul-de-sac. I positioned it right beside my parked car, and began clearing the street. The Zamboni glided over the ice, polishing the road to a glossy perfection. By the time I finished, my section of the street looked better than the HOA's official plow routes. The irony was delicious. I was breaking no rule, removing no snow improperly, and technically improving the community's safety. That night, I parked my car right beside the gleaming patch of ice, with the Zamboni parked neatly in front. I stood there, admiring the absurdity of it all, waiting for the HOA's inevitable reaction. The trap was set. By morning, every neighbor in Maplewood had heard about it. And Marlene? She was already on her way, clipboard in hand, eyes blazing like headlights through the snow. By sunrise, Maplewood Estates was buzzing. Not from snowplows or morning joggers, but from whispers. Every porch light flickered on. Every curtain cracked open just enough to see it. The Zamboni. There it sat, shining like a misplaced hockey arena prop, rumbling faintly in the morning frost. Its wide brush gleamed under the streetlight, its metal body covered in a dusting of snow. My car sat proudly beside it, tires resting on a stretch of ice so smooth you could see the reflection of the rooftops above. For a moment, the street was silent. Then came the gasps. Phones came out. Pictures snapped. One neighbor laughed. Another whispered something about, finally someone standing up to her. And then, right on cue, Marlene appeared. She marched down her driveway in her signature winter coat, clipboard tucked under one arm like a weapon. Her boots crunched through the snow with military precision. The look on her face said everything. She wasn't just angry. She was offended. The HOA president had finally met her match, and it wasn't a shouting neighbor or a defiant email. It was a 10,000-pound ice resurfacer parked in front of her perfect house. Within minutes, she was circling the machine, inspecting it as if it were radioactive. Her lips moved silently, counting violations that didn't exist. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't find one. I hadn't broken a single rule. The HOA's bylaws said, no street parking during winter. They didn't say anything about operating maintenance equipment to clear snow. And that's exactly what I was doing, maintaining the road. I had followed the rules. To the letter. Marlene hated that more than anything. Later that afternoon, a notice appeared on my door. Community violation, unauthorized vehicle obstruction. A fine of $250 and a demand to remove industrial machinery from residential property. I laughed. Then I read it again, slower. The notice wasn't official. It had no HOA letterhead, no board signature, no approval. Just Marlene's own handwriting in blue ink. She was going rogue. By the next morning, the Zamboni had gone viral. Someone's teen had posted it on TikTok with the caption, "My neighbor got banned from parking, so he bought a Zamboni." Within hours, it had 500,000 views. By day 2, news vans were rolling through Maplewood, cameras capturing the absurd suburban standoff between a homeowner and his HOA. And oh, Marlene hated that too. The board called an emergency meeting that weekend. Inside the HOA clubhouse, the tension was thick. Neighbors sat in folding chairs, bundled in coats, whispering as snow tapped against the windows. Marlene stood at the front, flipping through papers like a prosecutor preparing a case. She called it a blatant act of mockery against the association. She used words like public embarrassment and community disruption. But the faces around her told a different story. People weren't angry. They were amused. For years, she'd controlled this neighborhood with petty fines and power trips. Now, someone had made her the punchline. That's when she snapped. She motioned to her husband, who proudly presented a printed letter from the city's Department of Code Enforcement. Or so he claimed. The letter stated that operating heavy machinery without a permit violated local safety laws. But there was just one problem: the letter wasn't real. A neighbor, a retired cop named Jim, recognized the font. The letterhead was photoshopped, the signature was fake, and the date format didn't even match the city's standard. In seconds, the lie unraveled. The meeting descended into chaos. Voices rose, papers waved, phones recorded every moment. The board's integrity cracked like ice under pressure. And when someone shouted, "You forged that letter, Marlene," the room exploded in murmurs. I didn't have to say a word. By the time I left, the crowd was divided. Some wanted Marlene removed. Others defended her out of fear. But everyone knew one thing: she'd gone too far. That night, the HOA Facebook group lit up like wildfire. Screenshots of the fake letter spread everywhere. Neighbors posted memes of Zambonis clearing HOA offices. Even local radio picked it up. Maplewood Zamboni man, they called me. I became a suburban legend overnight. But with fame came retaliation. The next morning, I woke to a screech of tires outside. A tow truck idled near my house, orange lights flashing. Marlene stood beside it, waving a stack of papers like she finally had her weapon of victory. The driver hesitated, clearly unsure about towing something that looked more like a municipal vehicle than a car. But Marlene barked orders anyway. I stepped outside, calm but cold inside. The neighborhood gathered again, cameras ready. The tow driver inspected the Zamboni, scratched his head, then turned to Marlene. He shook his head. "Nope," he said, pointing to the registration tag I'd legally obtained that week. "This machine's licensed as snow removal equipment. You can't tow city-class machinery without authorization." Marlene's face froze. She stammered, then shouted about HOA jurisdiction and neighborhood safety, but it didn't matter. The driver climbed back in his truck, muttering something about crazy neighborhoods, and drove off. That moment sealed her defeat, for now. Because while I had the law on my side, Marlene wasn't done fighting. She retreated, humiliated, but already plotting her next move. And as I stood there, watching her disappear into her house, I realized something bigger was coming. Something worse than fines or fake letters. She wasn't just trying to stop me anymore. She was trying to destroy me. The Zamboni war had only just begun. The days that followed were colder than usual, not just the weather, but the air in Maplewood itself. Neighbors who once smiled and waved now whispered in hushed tones as I passed. The Zamboni sat quietly at the curb, covered in frost, like a sleeping giant waiting to wake again. And even though the neighborhood's chatter had mostly turned into admiration, I could feel the shift. The HOA wasn't done. Marlene had gone silent. And that silence was dangerous. For the first time in weeks, there were no notes on my door. No tickets on my windshield. No fake violations. Just quiet. The kind of quiet that hides a storm. Then, one morning, I noticed it. The HOA newsletter, normally stuffed into everyone's mailbox, had skipped my house. My copy was missing. I didn't think much of it until my neighbor, Jim, handed me his. He'd underlined a section in red marker and slid it across his porch table. There it was, halfway down the second page. Effective immediately, Maplewood Estates will begin enforcement of noise and machinery restrictions on residential property. No motorized or maintenance equipment shall be operated outside of designated hours or without prior HOA approval. It didn't mention me by name. It didn't have to. Everyone knew exactly who that line was meant for. They had rewritten the rules, mid-season, just to target me. The timing was perfect too. A fresh wave of snow had hit overnight. The roads were buried again, and for the first time since my Zamboni debut, I needed it. But now, if I even started it up, they could fine me for violating their new noise restriction. It was clever. Petty. But clever. Still, I wasn't about to let a line in a newsletter stop me. That night, once the streets were quiet, I suited up. Thick gloves, headlamp, and thermals. I waited until midnight, when the neighborhood lights dimmed and the frost sparkled under the street lamps. Then I started the Zamboni. Its engine growled softly, like a bear waking from hibernation. Slowly, I rolled it forward, brushing a perfect lane of snow-free asphalt right down the middle of the street. The hum of the machine echoed through the cold night air, not loud, just steady. But halfway through my route, I noticed movement. A flashlight beam cut across the snow. Then another. From the shadows near her house, Marlene emerged, phone in hand, robe blowing in the wind, recording every second. Her voice carried through the freezing air, though I couldn't hear the words. I didn't need to. I knew what she was doing. She wanted video proof. Evidence. Something she could twist into, disturbing the peace. I finished clearing the street anyway. I waved. Then I parked the Zamboni back in my driveway, humming quietly to itself as steam curled from its exhaust. By morning, the HOA's retaliation had escalated. A certified letter was taped to my door. This time, official. Stamped, dated, and signed by the board. It accused me of operating industrial equipment outside approved hours, creating hazardous roadway conditions, and threatening community safety. The kicker? They were demanding a hearing, an official HOA disciplinary meeting to determine potential suspension of my homeowner privileges. In Maplewood, that meant losing access to the community clubhouse, pool, and shared facilities. It was laughable, but also serious. Because buried in the fine print was a final warning: repeated noncompliance may result in legal escalation or property lien. That's when I realized, they were trying to bankrupt me. They couldn't tow my Zamboni. They couldn't outsmart the law. So now, they wanted to drain me financially through fines and bureaucracy. For most people, that might have worked. But not this time. See, while Marlene was busy drafting fake letters and rule updates, I'd been busy too. A week earlier, I'd reached out to the city's Public Works Department, specifically, the Snow Management Division. I'd explained my situation and asked for clarification on private snow removal within city limits. The response? Gold. As long as I wasn't blocking traffic or causing safety hazards, I had every right to clear snow on public roads adjacent to my property. In fact, I was technically helping the city reduce plowing costs. So, I printed that email, framed it, and brought it to the HOA hearing. The meeting was tense. Marlene sat at the head of the table, her lips pressed into a thin line. The rest of the board members shifted nervously in their chairs. A dozen neighbors filled the back row, pretending to be quiet but leaning forward in anticipation. When it was my turn, I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I simply placed the framed letter on the table. You could hear the silence stretch. Marlene's eyes darted to the text, scanning the seal, the signature, the official tone. For a moment, she said nothing. Then she tried to pivot, claiming the HOA's private road status made their rules superior to city ordinances. Except Maplewood wasn't technically private property. The city had confirmed that too. The walls of her authority crumbled in real time. By the end of the hearing, half the board looked embarrassed. One even apologized to me quietly afterward. The motion to fine me was withdrawn. The complaint dismissed. On paper, I'd won again. But victories against people like Marlene never come cleanly. That night, as I parked the Zamboni and stepped inside, I saw something on my windshield. A red substance, splattered across the glass. Sticky. Dark. It wasn't snow. It was ketchup. Packets of it, torn open and smeared across the front. Petty, childish, desperate, but unmistakably a message. The next morning, my mailbox was stuffed with anonymous HOA flyers, photos of my Zamboni, captions like, "Neighborhood eyesore, safety hazard, embarrassment to our community." The war had gone public. Some neighbors laughed it off, others distanced themselves. The HOA's propaganda machine was in full swing, but something unexpected was happening too. Support. People began honking as they drove past. One left a note that said, "Keep polishing the road. You're making this place more fun to live in." And on the community page, someone posted a meme of Marlene standing in front of a Zamboni that read, "When your power trip meets horsepower." The comment section exploded. The HOA couldn't silence everyone. So, Marlene escalated again. Late one evening, a new sign appeared at the neighborhood entrance. Effective immediately, all snow removal must be conducted by HOA-approved contractors only. That was it. No more pretending, no more loopholes. She had rewritten the rules specifically to eliminate me. But she'd made one mistake. That sign? It violated city code. Because HOA property signs had to be approved by the same public works department I'd already contacted. And I still had their number. The next chapter of this war wasn't going to be fought with snow or noise. It was going to be fought with paperwork. And I was ready to bury her in it. The next morning, Maplewood didn't wake to birds or snowplows. It woke to silence, the kind of silence that feels staged. The HOA's new sign stood tall at the entrance, its metal surface glinting in the weak winter sunlight. All snow removal must be conducted by HOA-approved contractors only. The letters were bold, almost aggressive, like a challenge carved into metal. At the bottom, in small font, it read, "Enforced by Maplewood Estates HOA Board." There it was, her final attempt to shut me down. Marlene had gone from rule enforcement to rule creation, from HOA president to self-appointed dictator. And the best part? She'd made a fatal mistake doing it. The city ordinance I'd memorized by now was crystal clear: any permanent or regulatory signage installed on public property, even at a neighborhood entrance, required municipal approval. Without it, the sign wasn't just invalid. It was illegal. So, I made a call. Within hours, I was on the phone with the Public Works Department again. I didn't even have to explain much, just emailed them a photo of the sign, GPS location, and timestamp. The reply came within a few hours. Unauthorized installation confirmed. Enforcement action will be scheduled. Those 6 words were the sweetest thing I'd read all week. That evening, while the neighborhood sat quietly in front of their fireplaces, a white city truck rolled into Maplewood. 2 workers in orange jackets hopped out, walked straight to the entrance, and removed the sign. Just like that. By morning, it was gone, replaced by a small temporary notice that read, "City of Maplewood Public Property. Unauthorized postings prohibited." It was over for her. Or so I thought. Because if Marlene couldn't control the streets, she'd go after my reputation instead. A week later, the HOA released a new community bulletin. It wasn't a newsletter, it was a manifesto. On the front page, a photo of me, standing next to the Zamboni, taken from what looked like a security camera. The caption read, "Resident engages in reckless operation of machinery, defying community safety guidelines. Please report any further disturbances to HOA board immediately." They had turned me into a villain, a neighborhood threat. Some neighbors sided with her out of fear. Others stayed silent, afraid of being fined themselves. But I could tell the mood was shifting again. People were tired, not of me, but of her. Because while Marlene played politics, I played strategy. I started documenting everything. Every notice. Every threat. Every fake signature. I took photos, screenshots, and even videos when HOA board members trespassed on my property to inspect the Zamboni. Then I made a binder, thick, organized, labeled by date. It wasn't anger driving me anymore. It was focus. And once it was ready, I submitted the entire file, not to the HOA, but to the State HOA Oversight Division. A real government department. A place where people like Marlene suddenly stopped laughing. The investigation took only 2 weeks. 2 weeks of silence, tension, and side glances every time Marlene walked her dog past my house. 2 weeks of her pretending nothing was wrong, even as the board members began avoiding her calls. Then one afternoon, a letter arrived in my mailbox. The envelope was thick, stamped with an official seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Notice of investigation, Maplewood Estates Homeowners Association. Alleged violation of state HOA conduct regulations, Section 4A, abuse of power, fabrication of policy, and misrepresentation of authority. It was happening. The HOA was officially under state review. By the next HOA meeting, the clubhouse was packed, standing room only. People who hadn't attended in years showed up just to watch the show. When the state investigator walked in, clipboard in hand, the room fell silent. He wasn't loud or intimidating, just calm, methodical, and very direct. He started asking questions Marlene couldn't answer. Who authorized the street sign? Who approved the fines without board consent? Why were there altered letters with fake city logos in the HOA's records? Each question was a nail in the coffin. By the end of the session, Marlene's face was pale. Her hands shook as she flipped through papers, trying to find a defense that didn't exist. Then the investigator turned to me. He asked if I had anything to add. I said nothing, just handed over my binder. Page after page of documented evidence. Screenshots of harassment. Proof of altered rules. Photos of the removed sign. It was all there, neatly categorized, impossible to deny. When I finished, the room was dead quiet. Even the fluorescent lights seemed to buzz softer. The investigator nodded once, closed the binder, and said he'd be in touch. That night, the HOA Facebook group went wild again. Word spread fast, faster than snow melt. The state was investigating. The president was on thin ice. By morning, Marlene had gone radio silent. Her car didn't move. Her house lights stayed off. For the first time since this all began, the self-appointed queen of the neighborhood had vanished from sight. But her silence didn't bring peace. The board, now leaderless and panicking, tried to control the narrative. They sent apology letters to residents, blaming miscommunication and procedural errors. They even suggested a temporary freeze on all HOA fines, a desperate attempt to calm the outrage. But it was too late. Because the story had already escaped Maplewood. Local media picked it up. Zamboni versus HOA hit the news again, this time with official documents and state involvement. Interviews, memes, and commentary poured online. I didn't speak to reporters, but someone leaked the hearing details anyway. By that evening, my quiet street had turned into a spectacle again, cameras, reporters, neighbors cheering from porches. And in the middle of it all, my Zamboni sat there, snow-free and spotless, a symbol of defiance in chrome and ice. That's when the knock came. I opened my door, and there she was. Marlene. No clipboard. No smugness. Just a woman who looked 10 years older than she had a month ago. Her eyes were tired, her voice soft. She handed me an envelope and turned away without a word. Inside was her resignation letter. Effective immediately. No apology. No explanation. Just silence on paper. The HOA war was over. Or at least, it seemed that way. Because as much as she'd been defeated, power like that doesn't die quietly. It lingers, hiding behind new faces, waiting for a chance to return. But for now, Maplewood was calm again. The snow fell gently that night, blanketing the street I'd fought to keep clear. And as I climbed onto the Zamboni one last time to polish the ice into glass, I couldn't help but smile. Revenge hadn't been loud. It hadn't been violent. It had been precise. Paperwork over power. Patience over panic. And for once, the quiet felt right. For a few short weeks, peace returned to Maplewood Estates. No warning letters. No fines. No passive-aggressive newsletters. Just quiet snow, soft lights, and the kind of suburban calm the HOA always claimed to stand for. Neighbors walked dogs without fear of being reported. Kids built snowmen that didn't violate property appearance standards. Even the mail carrier seemed to linger longer, chatting with residents instead of dodging HOA patrols. And me? I parked the Zamboni proudly at the edge of my driveway, not as a weapon anymore, but as a reminder. A silent, gleaming monument to standing your ground. For a while, that was enough. Until the envelopes started showing up again. They weren't the same as before. No handwriting. No threats. These were clean, official, printed with the Maplewood logo embossed on the top. A subtle message, "We're back." Inside the first one was a friendly announcement. The board of directors is pleased to welcome our new interim president, Mr. Daniel Reese. Daniel Reese. A name no one recognized. The letter explained he'd been unanimously appointed by remaining board members after Marlene's resignation. A man with over 20 years of experience in community management. It sounded rehearsed. Corporate. Sterile. At first, no one cared. People were tired of HOA drama. But within a week, the tone of Maplewood began to change again. Daniel wasn't loud like Marlene. He was quiet. Polished. Professional. But behind that politeness was something colder, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He started small. A reminder about trash can placement. A notice about driveways needing snow removal within 12 hours of snowfall. Then, a survey asking whether large vehicles and industrial equipment should be allowed on residential streets. Everyone knew what that was about. He never mentioned my Zamboni by name. But the message was clear. The war was back, just wearing a new suit. Unlike Marlene, Daniel didn't shout or make mistakes. He played the long game. Every letter he sent was perfectly worded. Every action technically within policy. He didn't forge or falsify, he just twisted. He started hosting informational sessions in the clubhouse. On paper, they were for community engagement. In reality, they were strategy meetings. He was rebuilding the board's power, slowly turning fearful residents into allies. And this time, he wasn't attacking me directly. He was isolating me. Neighbors who once waved began looking away. Conversations quieted when I walked by. The Facebook group that had once cheered for Zamboni Man started filling with subtle posts about property value risks and public image. I wasn't being fined. I was being framed. Then came the zoning complaint. A letter from the city, not the HOA, or at least, that's what it looked like. It stated that a resident operating commercial equipment had violated neighborhood zoning rules. But this time, I was ready. I checked the reference code listed in the letter. It didn't exist. The form looked real, but the footer was missing the official city watermark. Someone had made it look official, just enough to scare me into compliance. So, I called the city again. They confirmed it immediately, fake document. And that was the moment everything clicked? Daniel wasn't acting alone. He had brought in outside help, likely someone from one of his management companies. People who knew how to weaponize bureaucracy. Not through open lies, but through confusion and exhaustion. He wasn't trying to win publicly like Marlene. He was trying to wear me down quietly. For the first time, I felt it, not anger, not rage, but fatigue. Constant paperwork. Constant suspicion. Constant eyes watching, waiting for me to slip. I thought about giving in. Selling the house. Leaving the madness behind. But then, one night, as I sat by the window watching snow fall under the streetlight, I saw something that changed my mind. A small blue light blinked near my mailbox. A camera. Hidden in the bushes. Someone had planted a surveillance camera facing my driveway. That was it. No more defense. No more silence. If Daniel wanted to play the game by the book, I'd bury him in the book. The next day, I filed 2 official reports, one with the city's Privacy Enforcement Office, and one with the state's HOA Compliance Division, again. This time, I didn't just submit a complaint. I included everything. Every fake notice, every shady email, every manipulated policy Daniel had tried to pass. And for good measure, I sent a copy to a local journalist who'd covered the Zamboni story months earlier. Within 48 hours, the story broke again. Maplewood HOA under investigation, again. The article featured screenshots, quotes, even images of the hidden camera. Daniel called an emergency board meeting the next day, but the damage was already done. Half the board resigned that night. The others started publicly distancing themselves. The city issued a statement confirming they were reviewing HOA activities for potential privacy violations. Neighbors who had turned away suddenly started knocking again. One left cookies and a note that said, "We see what you're doing. Don't stop." The tide had shifted, one last time. And then, quietly, the city made its move. An official notice was posted on the HOA clubhouse door. Pending audit, all administrative operations suspended until further review. In one stroke, the HOA's power was frozen. No fines. No rules. No control. The Zamboni sat quietly by my driveway, its metal gleaming under a soft layer of snow, as if it knew the war was nearly over. But victory didn't feel like triumph. It felt like closure, cold, silent, earned. Because in Maplewood, the snow never stays gone for long. And somewhere, under that white blanket of calm, you could still feel the hum of buried conflict waiting to rise again. Still, for the first time in months, I exhaled. I had survived not one, but 2 regimes of control. And this time, it wasn't luck. It was patience. Persistence. And paperwork. The Zamboni had started as a joke, a way to mock a ridiculous rule. But it ended up being something else entirely. A symbol. Of defiance. Of standing up when everyone else sits quietly. Of finding calm in chaos, and humor in the cold. But even as I parked it for the night, brushing snow off the metal frame, I couldn't shake the feeling that the story wasn't done. Because power always finds a new name. And sometimes, all it takes to wake it again, is one more snowfall. It began on a quiet morning. No letters in the mailbox. No HOA patrols circling the block. Just the sound of snow falling, soft, steady, endless. It had been 2 weeks since the city suspended the HOA's operations. Maplewood felt like it was breathing again. Kids were sledding down the gentle slope near the park. Driveways were piled high with snowmen, uneven and colorful, like tiny acts of rebellion. Even the air felt different, lighter, cleaner, freer. But beneath that peace was a strange emptiness. The HOA office stood silent, its windows dark, the sign on the door now faded and peeling. The once feared letters had stopped, but so had the sense of order that used to define this place. Without rules, Maplewood was rediscovering itself, imperfect, spontaneous, human. And me? I still kept the Zamboni. It had become part of the landscape now. Kids called it the Beast. Neighbors waved when I drove it down the street after a storm. It wasn't a weapon anymore. It was a symbol, a reminder that sometimes you have to break a little ice to keep things moving. But peace never lasts long in a place built on control. One evening, as the sky turned the color of cold steel, a familiar sound returned, not the growl of engines, but the soft click of envelopes sliding into mailboxes. The HOA was back. Or at least, what was left of it. The letters were short. Formal. No names attached. The Maplewood Community Association has been restructured under new management. We aim to restore order and integrity. That word again. Order. The neighbors whispered. Some groaned, others shrugged. After all, most had lived under the HOA so long that its absence felt unnatural. People crave structure, even when it hurts them. But something about these letters felt different. No threats. No legal jargon. Just neutrality. For a moment, I wondered if maybe, just maybe, they'd learned. Then came the knock. A man in his late 40s stood at my door, holding a binder and wearing a neat winter coat. No badge, no clipboard, no smirk. He introduced himself as Andrew Tate, not the one you're thinking of, the new community mediator. He said his job wasn't to control, but to listen. And for the first time in Maplewood history, an HOA representative meant it. He'd been sent by the state-appointed Oversight Board, a temporary system created after the investigation into Maplewood's leadership. Their task was to rebuild associations that had collapsed under corruption and power abuse. This wasn't the return of the old HOA. This was its reckoning. Andrew asked for my help. Not as an enemy, but as a witness. He'd read about the Zamboni story, the viral videos, the coverage, the neighborhood split. He wanted to understand what went wrong here, from the ground level. So I told him everything. About Marlene. About Daniel. About the fake letters, the spying, the intimidation. And when I was done, he didn't make excuses. He just nodded, quietly taking notes, letting the silence sit heavy between us. Then he said something that stuck with me. HOAs were meant to protect homes. Somewhere along the way, they started protecting power. That night, as I stood in my driveway, watching snowflakes swirl in the pale glow of the lamplight, I realized, this was the true end. Not with noise, not with victory speeches, but with understanding. The war had never really been about a parking spot or a machine. It was about control, and what happens when ordinary people decide they've had enough of it. Over the next few weeks, Andrew held meetings at the clubhouse. Real ones. Open to everyone. No secret ballots, no forced votes. Residents shared ideas freely, from snow removal schedules to community cleanups. No one was fined. No one was silenced. And for the first time in Maplewood's history, the rules were written by the people, not against them. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. By late February, the community voted unanimously to retire the old HOA charter completely. In its place came something new, a volunteer-led neighborhood council. No power, no fines, no politics. Just people helping people. The old office was turned into a shared workshop. Kids painted murals on the walls. The sign above the door now read, Maplewood Makerspace, built by the community. And right in front of it sat my Zamboni. Not as a rebellion. Not as a trophy. But as a monument to everything we'd endured. One morning, the local news team returned to do a follow-up story. They filmed the Zamboni, the murals, the laughter echoing through the streets. The headline read, From Control to Community, How One Neighborhood Took Back Its Power. The clip went viral again, millions of views, comments flooding in from people who'd fought their own HOA nightmares. And every time someone asked, was it worth it? I thought of that long winter. The sleepless nights. The cold stares. The hidden cameras. Then I thought of this moment, standing under the soft glow of morning snow, the street quiet except for the faint hum of life returning to normal. Yeah. It was worth it. Because sometimes, you don't fight to win. You fight to remind people that they can. The first snow of March began to fall that evening, a gentle, quiet curtain of white that blanketed Maplewood like forgiveness. I started the Zamboni one last time, letting its low rumble fill the street. Neighbors came out, laughing as I cleared a perfect, shining path through the snow, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Kids followed behind, sliding on the smooth surface, their laughter echoing through the crisp winter air. Somewhere in that sound, I heard something deeper, the echo of freedom. Not loud. Not defiant. Just steady. The same way the Zamboni moved, slow, deliberate, unstoppable. And as the flakes kept falling, I realized the irony of it all. The HOA had banned street parking to keep the roads clear. In the end, I had done exactly that. Just on my own terms. As I parked the Zamboni one final time and shut off the engine, the world around me fell into perfect silence. No fines. No warnings. No control. Just snow. Just peace. Just the quiet truth that sometimes, the best way to fight back, is to keep your lane clean.